that works now. It was telling me there for a little while that I was not allowed to unmute myself. So sorry about that. I trust you can hear me okay now.
We can. Sorry about that, but good to have you here. So how's that civilian oversight board doing?
Well, great. Let me just, I'm going to put up a few slides here to share. I trust you can all see that now.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. So yes, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Madison and the civilian oversight. I call it the experiment that's happening, because we're doing some things here that are in some ways fairly unique, and it's a very exciting time. Joy, you gave a very helpful introduction to the issue with sort of highlighting some of the things that have brought many of these policing and racial issues to a head over the summer. But where I want to start is by letting you know that in Madison we've actually been addressing these issues for quite a while. And I want to just sort of remind folks of the history that led to all of this and where that has led us in the process of reform. Madison has historically had a very progressive police department. It was sort of one of the cradles of the movement for community policing and problem-oriented policing, which have been adapted in many places around the country. But despite that history of progressive policing, Madison has encountered its problems. And it all really started, I think, coming to a head starting back in 2012, 2013. In 2012, as you can see here, there was a pretty high profile killing by police officers of an intoxicated man named Paul Heenan. In 2013, the race equity report issued by the Wisconsin Council of Family on Children and Families really sort of shook the community up by documenting how gross the racial disparities are in this community. We have a 10-to-1 black to white arrest ratio in Madison, for example. Then in August 9th, of course, Michael Brown was killed by police in Ferguson, which shook up the entire nation. And shortly after that, in Madison, Tony Robinson was killed by a Madison police officer, a shooting that was in part captured on dash cam video. And that sort of brought the whole issue to a head, so that later in May of 2015, the Madison Common Council created what became known as the Madison Police Department Policy and Procedure Review Ad Hoc Committee. And that began my involvement with the issues, because I was appointed to that committee. And the committee, this was a committee whose charge it was to basically review everything about the Madison Police Department from top to bottom, to try to figure out what was going on, as the community was recognizing that despite the many good things the police department has done, recognizing that the police department was not free of its problems, and in particular had serious challenges of trust among many in Madison's minority or otherwise marginalized communities, that there were real problems there that needed to be addressed. So in 2015, our committee set out to do this work. We spent 4 years studying the Madison Police Department exhaustively. This was the committee. By the time it was done, Tom Brown and I were co-chairs of the committee for the last two years. This committee worked intensively. We hired, to some controversy in the city, the council appropriated about $400,000 for us to hire an outside consulting firm, the OIR Group from California, who did an absolutely remarkable job, a thorough job of analyzing the community and the police department from top to bottom. And based on that, and they produced a 250-page report, I think, with about 146 recommendations for reform of the Madison Police Department. Our committee then worked on that, took that as our starting point, and we evaluated every one of those recommendations, heard from experts around the country, heard from community members, and then modified all of those recommendations and added another 30-some recommendations to it, until we finally published this report in October of 2019, culminating the work of that ad hoc committee. And we wound up with a report I think 180 some pages long, with now 177 specific recommendations for more reform of the Madison Police Department. And that brings us to the issue for tonight's conversation, which is that the capstone recommendation that we adopted, the one that we thought was the most important and that tied the whole thing together, was a recommendation for creating a civilian oversight mechanism so that civilians could have a direct role in overseeing police in this community. And that involved we recommended creating an office of an independent monitor who answers to a civilian oversight board. Our recommendations was based on the following thinking, and the reason we saw this as sort of the capstone and the most important of all of our recommendations were the reasons for that were these. Number one, is a very fundamental philosophical perspective that we had, was that in a free and democratic society, police are called upon to exercise pretty powerful authority over individuals. And we as community members yield some of our individual liberties and authorize police to take us into custody, to exercise force against us, to issue directives in the interest of public safety. But because it involves such a governmental intrusion into individuals' lives, it's a matter that should be, philosophically, we believe, should be governed, regulated, overseen by the people themselves. And therefore, civilian oversight, just as a philosophical matter, was very important to us. The second reason was that one of the major crises we were trying to deal with was this lack of confidence, this distrust between Madison's police and some of its marginalized communities. And so it seemed to us that what we really needed to do was create a mechanism, a direct conduit for linking together police and these marginalized communities to build in a dialogue, conversation, and to let these communities know that their voices are important, that they're being heard, and in fact to give them some power and some authority. And the final reason why we saw this as so ultimately important was because we didn't want our 177 recommendations to go sit on a shelf somewhere and gather dust. And therefore, we wanted a mechanism in place that could ensure, number one, that the recommendations were being implemented and abided by moving forward, but also number two, that the process of evaluating the police department and the community's needs was an ongoing one, that our 177 recommendations were just a starting point. And we wanted a mechanism for continuing that process. The independent monitor and the civilian oversight board would do that. The independent monitor we conceived of would be fully independent, that is fully independent from the police department, but also fully independent from the political powers that otherwise run the city. And what was one of the things that was fairly unique about our civilian oversight mechanism is that there are really two models out there in the rest of the country. One model is that that the civilian oversight mechanism generally advises on policy and procedure. The other model is a model whereby the civilian oversight body essentially conducts independent investigations and reviews incidents involving alleged police misconduct. We combined them both. We thought it important that our civilian oversight body be able to both weigh in on, bring community interests, community concerns, community values to the police department to help shape policy and procedure moving forward. But we also, in order to ensure accountability and trust, we wanted to make sure that the independent monitor could engage in full review and independent investigations of specific instances of alleged police misconduct. And so we equipped this monitor with broad authority, broad power of access to information. And what's interesting, though, is that this monitor does not have the authority to actually adjudicate anything, to issue any directives. And part of that was because we still believe that the police need the ability to run their own shop, but also because Wisconsin has a unique structure of oversight of police in which the Police and Fire Commission, by statute, almost uniquely among the states, by statute, the Police and Fire Commission exists as the decision-making body with regard to a limited number of police and fire department issues, specifically hiring, firing, promotion, and discipline. And so by statute, we couldn't intrude on those authorities that the Police and Fire Commission have. But we thought it important to create the independent monitor as a way of raising concerns, increasing transparency, and actually increasing the public's access to the Police and Fire Commission to litigate claims of police misconduct by, for example, not only conducting independent investigations, but also the independent monitor now has the ability to appoint counsel to individuals to bring their grievances before the Police and Fire Commission. Working with the independent monitor is the Civilian Oversight Board, which, as Joy mentioned at the outset, I have been appointed as an alternate member of that Civilian Oversight Board. And this is the board that, that oversees the work of the independent monitor. It participates with the independent monitor in policy reviews and investigations of police misconduct, and is responsible for doing an annual review of the chief. Right now, nobody does a review of the chief. This changes that so that the Civilian Oversight Board and the monitor will do that. One of the things we learned in the course of creating this structure was that civilian oversight mechanisms like this in other places have, in some places, worked well, in other places they've been complete failures. And we wanted to draw, of course, on those features of other models that worked well and try to avoid those that were failures. And what we identified was that the things that make these mechanisms work well are adequate funding, adequate authority to gain access to relevant information, and really importantly, complete independence and ensuring that the people on the oversight board, for example, actually represent the people who are most affected by policing and who are otherwise most marginalized. So our recommendation was that the board be composed of people with a wide range of experiences, backgrounds, including people who have lived experiences with homelessness, arrest and conviction records, mental health problems, drug and alcohol problems, and that a majority of the board be, in fact, nominated by a group of community organizations who represent individuals from those different demographics. This fall, the Common Council passed ordinances creating both the Independent Monitor and the Civilian Oversight Board, following precisely the recommendations that our committee had made. The Civilian Oversight Board has now met twice. One of the first things it needs to do is to hire the Independent Monitor, and that process will be moving forward. These, by the way, are the organizations who were selected to make the nominations for membership on the Civilian Oversight Board, and this also lists who it was that each of these organizations actually nominated 3 individuals, and then the mayor and the Common Council selected 1 from each group to appoint to the committee. So the process is just beginning. It is an experiment in that no other civilian oversight board, although there are civilian oversight bodies in many other jurisdictions, I don't know of any that is quite as expansive or composed in exactly the same way ours is. And we're very, very hopeful that this will in fact be a productive mechanism for conducting civilian oversight. So let me try to stop sharing. There we go. So I think that's about the time that I have allotted. I'm happy to answer questions, but that's at least a brief introduction to the civilian oversight mechanisms that Mattis is experimenting with now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Finley. So if you do have questions about the Civilian Oversight Board or the Independent Monitor, please do enter them into chat and I can present them right now. We can also have time at the end of our speakers to get more questions. I don't see any questions right now, but when you mentioned doing a review of the police chief, or a job performance review of the police chief, it did remind me that we do have the finalists for Madison's new police chief introduced yesterday and making some public comments yesterday. Do you have some sort of hope for the new police chief of Madison? What do you think the new police chief of Madison should prioritize?
Well, I mean, it's a it's a very, very difficult job, but I think from where I sit, the priorities need to be to build upon the history of progressive policing that Madison has had. One of the things we learned from the OIR report, that a recurring question that was arising both within and outside of the department is our department, are we who we say we are? That is the department still living up to those progressive ideals of community policing and problem-oriented policing? So one I think important thing the chief will need to do is to really focus on ensuring that those ideals are alive and respected and invigorated in this police department. And along the way, I think the chief really needs to be attendant to the challenges of building trust in all of Madison's diverse communities, because that has been one of the overwhelming problems that I think the policing in Madison has faced in recent years, is this breakdown of trust. And so someone asked me at one point, what is this new civilian? How do you think the new chief will view this new civilian oversight mechanism intruding in the chief's business? And my reaction was, I hope the new chief will not see this as an intrusion, but as a gift. It's a gift to the police because it provides a bridge between Madison and all of its communities, and a way for the police to engage directly with the people and to ensure that everyone's needs are being met. And in that way, I think it can really produce harmony in this community in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. So the chief needs to be someone who recognizes that and is willing to work with the civilian oversight mechanism and to work with all of Madison's diverse voices and communities, even those who are loudest and most critical.
Paul asks, how will the work of the board be communicated to the public?
That's still being worked out, but certainly there will be a website. The board will be required to issue a public report at the end of each year. Both the independent monitor and the civilian review board will are required by the statute, by the ordinance, to issue reports. And then, of course, all of the board's meetings are public meetings that anyone can attend, and everyone is invited to attend, to sit in on and listen to and weigh in on. So, and I suspect, although this hasn't been resolved yet, that there will probably be community gatherings, community meetings with the board that are listening sessions, but also information sessions. But I think the question is a good one, because it raises one of the challenges that the board is going to have to address, and that is one of the things policing has struggled with is transparency. And that transparency issue is one that's going to matter to this board as well. So, as I said, it's early. The board hasn't really set up any processes yet, but I'm sure and hopeful that the board will certainly be attentive to that.
Virginia asks, are you in favor of changing the statutes so the committee would have more power over decisions, so that at-risk communities might have more confidence in outcomes?
At this point, I think the board, the model that we've set up is one that's worth giving a try to. Policing is a very complicated matter. It's very difficult, and we demand an awful lot of police. We want them to protect us, but we don't want them to intrude on our privacy. We want them to solve all kinds of problems. And it really is an area in which professional training is important, and experience. And so the police themselves, the police chief and the command staff, have a lot of information, a lot of responsibilities that they have to respond to that probably a civilian board doesn't. So I'd be wary personally of giving the board the authority to dictate too much to the police. And I'm eager to try this new approach first, whereby the board communicates directly to the police and uses the power of the public podium to bring these issues to bear on the police, and see if that can work first, and that perhaps can be the appropriate accommodation. The other thing to remember is One of the things that the civilian oversight mechanism will be doing is providing reports to the Common Council and the mayor. And if the Common Council and the mayor believe that the Civilian Oversight Board and the Independent Monitor are raising issues that are serious enough that they require directives to the police, the mayor and the Common Council do have the lawful authority to issue binding orders to the police. And so they can pick up on these recommendations from the civilian oversight mechanism. So there are ways to do it. It just is carefully delineated.
We will move on now, but we'll try to get to some more questions about the civilian. Let's move on now. Our next speaker is Colleen Clark Bernhardt. She is the Manager of Policy and Practice Innovation for the Dane County Board of Supervisors and the coordinator of the Dane County Criminal Justice Council. She's going to tell us about a new major initiative to divert people with mental health challenges away from the criminal justice system. Colleen, you're up.
Okay, great. Can you hear me and can you see my screen? Want to make sure.
Yes. We see and hear you, and we see a partial screen. So,
all right. Let me, like I said, this is not, why don't I just talk to you? How about that?
Sure.
You can share out the PowerPoint with your members at any time. So I am the coordinator of the Dane County Criminal Justice Council. I want to make sure we have enough time for plenty of questions. So I'm not going to give you every council member's name. But the folks that you commonly see in the newspaper around criminal justice, that's who is in the Criminal Justice Council. It's made up of 13 members, which are the decision makers or the agency director level. So you have the county executive, the county board chair, the district attorney, the sheriff, the chief judge, the clerk of courts, Madison Police, the Madison mayor, public defender, chair of public protection and judiciary. DOC is on that committee, and and the chief of chiefs. I'm sure I'm missing someone. So we meet monthly, and our major tenants, and frankly, the CJC has been around for a long time. I've been lucky enough to work for Dane County since 2008. I will say it wasn't as active as it is now. In 2008, when I worked for Kathleen Falk, Joe Parisi, when County Exec Parisi came on, it became a lot more active. But our major tenants in the Criminal Justice Council are justice and public safety, equity, and data-driven decision-making. Now, when we look at what you're asking, what's different, right? What's changing in Dane County's public safety? We saw most recently, and I think Keith alluded to kind of the historic documents, right? Going back to 2013, I would even push it back to the state of Black Madison in 2008 and the Task Force on Racial Disparities in Criminal Justice in 2009. Those may not have been as widely read, but I will say that really formed the basis for a lot of the work of the CJC. So to start with, looking at holistic reform right now, we're really looking at the Resolution 180. So Resolution 180 is, if you think about, okay, that cross-categorical city, county, cops and budget holders, members of the CJC, and looking at, we've got a couple of big things happening, right? We've got all this grounding that we've done over the last 12 years, frankly, which includes being the only county in the state that has a data sharing agreement between data holders in the Criminal Justice Council. So I was lucky enough, I want to say 4 years ago, through the county board funding, a CJC dedicated to the work of the Criminal Justice Council research analyst. Took us about 1.5 years working with the National Council on Crime and Delinquency to craft an MOU to allow us to be able to get data from various groups, including the 5 cities that surround Madison, Madison Police, the courts, the Sheriff's Office, Clerk of Courts, and more. So what we do is use that data to inform policy, right? So historically, some of the arguments you heard Keith say 10-1, I would argue it's 11-1 arrest ratio, black to white. And frankly, when I was staffing the 2009 task force report, it was about 11-1 arrest black to white. We haven't changed the needle on that, but one of the early arguments was you all don't have accurate data. And that was also something that came out loud and clear in the 2015 county board work groups around mental health, length of stay in jail, and racial disparities. The comment from those community plus stakeholder groups was Dane County needs to be able to measure their data and tell us what the data is really saying before you can ever manage it. Because these community advocates, folks that were loud and clear after Tony Robinson were sitting in rooms with current circuit court judges, asking questions, looking at the criminal justice system in this lineal fashion and saying, well, it looks right on paper, but how is it as our experience? And it wasn't jiving. And then they would ask for data around, okay, well, where do folks of color go? Where are white people going? Where are those areas of disproportionality? And nobody was able to give a really strong answer. And so one of the major things that came out of that resolution 556 was the county board went ahead and was able to fund a criminal justice council research analyst. So I can't stress that enough, that all of this work on learning national best practices is great, but if you don't know the local culture, the local data, and what the local community members are saying, those national best practices are not as meaningful, right? It doesn't necessarily translate that something that works in Pittsburgh or in San Antonio will work perfectly in Dane County, just replicating. But moving on to what's different right now. So people have asked me, especially once they look at resolution 180, which is this holistic list of reforms. Like, how, Colleen, did this come about this year? Was it the killing of Mr. Floyd? Was it the protests in the street? Is it the looming jail that Dane County has to build? And it's all of those, but it's plus having the structure and the research and the community voice and the stakeholder engagement that led up to this, right? For the last 10 years. If we didn't have the research, the collaboration from the stakeholders and the community voice, the protests would have happened. And frankly, folks, from my standpoint alone, likely would have been scrambling to think of, well, what do we do? Where we, I think, are in better position is we've had these work groups, we've had task force, and now we have the data. We have a community voice with unique partnerships, and we have the stakeholders at the table saying, yes, I'm willing to look at this and move in this area. And so what we've got is, when you talk about what are these major reforms coming out, and you'll see this, and I apologize for my lack of PowerPoint, but what you'll see are a myriad of reforms. And I hate to highlight the most expensive things, because I don't think always the most expensive things are the sole answer to reforming our criminal justice system, right? But the things that I was asked to talk about specifically today are the proposed Triage and Restoration Center. So I'll start right there. Currently, the proposed Triage and Restoration Center is really part of the process of looking systemically at the criminal justice system and the oftentimes deadly intersection between criminal justice and behavioral health issues. That could be a mental health issue, a substance use issue, or something else. Oftentimes, you see that's when deadly force is used, where outcomes are particularly bad. So what we did is, we are a part of the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge, which is America's effort looking at reducing America's jail population and increasing racial equity. Through our partnership with MacArthur, we're able to get technical experts to come to Dane County. One of those technical experts, and somebody give me a time check when you need to. One of those technical experts helped us look at the sequential intercept model of criminal justice, right? So they broke it out like you would an elephant in different pieces, because to say, let's transform the entire system at once becomes overwhelming. So it's intercept 0 is community. What's happening at the intersection between behavioral health and criminal justice in community? Then it moves on to law enforcement, to courts, all the way through disposition and DOC, Department of Corrections, and then back to reentry, which, folks come back to community. So what we did was create a new subcommittee. It's not new anymore. It's about a year plus, which is the Criminal Justice Council Behavioral Health Subcommittee. And I think your group has seen there's a listening session coming up for that subcommittee. The subcommittee is charged at looking at the intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice through each one of those intercepts, 0 through 6. So clearly we started with intercept community, 0, and 1, law enforcement. That subcommittee is chaired by the Director of Human Services and vice chaired by Dane County Sheriff's Office. And when we looked at that intercept and looked at the options for folks in the community, if I have a family member that's struggling, oftentimes folks call 911. 911 at this point usually will dispatch law enforcement. Now, Madison does have some mental health teams. There is some co-responder model, but that's not true of the whole county, right? And I work for Dane County. I collaborate a lot with the city of Madison, and it's a part of it, but we have to look at the whole system. And so when we were looking at that oftentimes deadly intersection, and we're looking at what's going on around the country, we saw a couple of different things. One was the CAHOOTS, that behavioral health ambulance that the city of Madison has now put in money to pilot a program to send folks other than law enforcement as first responders. So that would include, likely in the city of Madison, it'll be a community paramedic along with a crisis worker, to cases, to calls that seem to be behavioral health motivated, right? They may have to call for law enforcement backup, but the first thing is sending that behavioral health ambulance. And then the other thing that I heard from both community members and cops, frankly, was if somebody's in a behavioral health crisis, we have two options. We book them in jail, which is we're trying to lower the jail population. We know that's not good for the population of the jail. B, it's horrible for the individual, right? So they can long time. So what was a voluntary, I will look, I will talk to your physicians about my behavioral health crisis, turns into an involuntary crisis, right? And so we wanted to look at alternatives. And this is where I talk about, thinking of the structure almost as like if you see an oak growing, when you plant an oak, all the roots grow first. You don't see much movement up top, but you see all the growth underneath. If we didn't have the data, the best practices, the research, the community member partnerships, we wouldn't have known how many frequent utilizers of multiple systems we have right now. And so we couldn't make that data argument about, is this the smartest way that Dane County residents are using their money? So that's why we moved into really looking at the Triage and Restoration Center, which is there is no wrong door, is the ideal. So there might be a living room model in the front end, which would give peer supports for people who are struggling with mental health. And folks could walk in for an assessment. And on the other end, separated architecturally, is a secure drop-off for law enforcement. So they have an option other than jail or the emergency room. So there is a listening session and a communication session for the community to talk to the Criminal Justice Council Behavioral Health Subcommittee specifically about how we can engage the community more on that process and what qualities we should look at for a national planner. The last thing I'll talk about, and again, I would look at Resolution 180 because it is the most holistic reform that I've seen, frankly, in my colleagues across the country as well, as a community justice center. Back in 2015, we took a city, county, and community group to New York City to look at best practices around community courts and restorative justice. When we came back from that convening, the Community Restorative Court of Dane County was created, right, and enhanced. We've seen huge success rates of that, but we had this gnawing thought that we could do more. It could be much more than what the CRC is, which is a non-traditional approach to criminal justice for 17 to 26-year-old misdemeanors. So the Community Justice Center concept is not necessarily that you're in crisis, but that you want a different approach to criminal justice. You can get wraparound services in community justice systems or centers. You may be law enforcement involved or not. But the thing that came out, and we just had a community conversation on this with Judge Calabrese from Red Hook and Dr. G from Nehemiah and the DA and Representative Stubbs. One of the best lines that came out of that community conversation was, it seems like they treated people with grace. It seemed like they treated people with grace. And so I looked up some of the definitions of grace, and one was courteous goodwill. And when we walked through the Red Hook Community Justice Center, from the moment we went through security, all the way through courtrooms, through housing supports, education supports, and frankly, even down in the holding cells with NYPD, that's what we experienced, grace and courteous goodwill, where folks aren't treated like a case, they're treated like a person, they're treated like a community member that we have a huge desire and we're willing to partner with for their success. So I'm going to stop it there because I see what time it is and it's 1:45, and I want to give some time and yield my time to my good friend Anthony Cooper, but I'm happy to answer a question or two and then I'll be around. But you'll see in the PowerPoint for all these major initiatives, kind of a really simple diagram of what it is and what it is not.
Thank you, Colleen, and I apologize for not being able to help you with that technical part, but I'm sure people can access those slides. If you have a question for Colleen Clark Bernhardt, you can put it in the chat. I'll start with one. You started with data and numbers. What do you hope those numbers say once these reforms are underway for a while?
Yeah, so obviously I hope that as the council hopes, we see racial equity increase, we see length of stay in Dane County Jail decrease, we see supports and wraparound care for our individuals and just like community well-being and community health increase. I think without the numbers, and I'll throw healthcare in here, frankly, that's the number we don't have, right? How costly are the same people that we see in the jail to the hospitals, and really what is that cost to our community to have people cycling in and out? So it's my invitation to engage other groups that frankly haven't been at the table in this reform, and where triage and restoration centers have been really successful. Those big healthcare institutions, frankly, have come in as partners and as financial partners.
We will move on for time purposes, and again, take more questions for all of our speakers at the end of our presentations. Our next speaker is Anthony Cooper, Sr. He is the Executive Director of Focused Intervention Coalition in Madison and Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Reentry Services for the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. Take it away, Anthony.
Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm like, what time is it again?
Sorry.
No problem. No, but I'm glad to definitely be here, to be in a phenomenal room with phenomenal people that are trying to do, trying to bring about change, and who wants to be in the know of what's going on in the community, and also in the know of what's going on in different sectors. I mean, just the phenomenal people, Colleen. I'm really excited to meet Keith. I saw him when I was a part of the AHA community, but Colleen, I've been, I want to say it's been probably about 7-8 years now. Been kind of just navigating different services together. So I will go ahead and put my PowerPoint up and kind of make it not quick, but making sure we're getting straight to the point about some stuff. Let's see here if this works. All right. Okay. So actually, I am the CEO of the Focus Interruption. We were going by Focus Interruption Coalition, so we changed the name to Focus Interruption. Because one of the things is, as we do, we bring about quite a few different things, and also being able to connect with different services throughout Dane County. But our real focus is to be able to really change things throughout the United States. So Focus Interruptions, Madison's only nonprofit solely focused on, community gun violence prevention and intervention strategies. We assisted over 500 victims in gun violence and their families, and that's from 2016 to today, and the numbers that probably could go up just a little bit today. We collaborate with local social services, Madison Police Department, Metropolitan School District, Madison Metropolitan School District, UW Health, Public Health, Dane County, Nehemiah, Thomas and Associates to provide services to victims, perpetrators of gun violence, and their families to keep people safe. So gun violence in Madison, 88% increase in gun violence in 2020 versus 2019. That means that things are getting worse. We're starting to see. I mean, of course, we feel and others who we're talking to because this isn't just, as much as we, even though here in this setting right now, we're talking about Madison, but it goes so far more beyond Madison. This is something that is challenged throughout the whole United States. The pandemic only added another additional level to what's going on throughout the United States as well. When people, I mean, when you're dealing with trauma and things of that nature, and trauma, mental health, and so on, and poverty. You have 39 people who have been shot. We have 8 people who have been killed, including 11-year-old child that to this, that's still, What is the group violence intervention? Partnerships based on problem-solving initiatives involving police, social services, community working together to reduce gun violence. Since 1993, has been used in cities across the country to reduce rates of community gun violence by 30 to 60%. So I just want to be able to, something that, as I put this slide together, what we are doing isn't as though it's brand new and this is just something we just came, just pulled out the sky and said, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to be about. So these types of organizations like ours have actually been around since 1993. Just it has not been here in Madison. So one of the organizations that I'll talk about is the Oakland Ceasefire has reduced gun violence by 50% in Oakland. So when we look at the numbers here, I have to kind of move the people as I'm trying to talk about the numbers here. So Oakland Ceasefire successfully reduced gun violence, homicide rates by 50% by implementing evidence-based group violence interventions. So if you look at the numbers here, this is a huge change. Yeah, huge change, not just, a lot of times I think some folks may get kind of stuck on and say, hey, that's not my community. That's not on the west side or that's not on the east side. This is all our community. Gun violence affects everyone. It affects every single last one of you, affects every child, affects every mother, affects every father, every young person who is out there who no one, I'm trying not to be too explicit, but no one from birth thinks about, hey, I want to carry a gun for the rest of my life, or I want to cause harm to someone. Those are things that at times they're either taught or because of environment, it feels as though that I have to adapt to my environment to be a part of this or that. So what I would like to share with you all is a video here that just kind of talks about some of the work that what they did in Oakland. Hopefully this works, and it should. Hopefully you all hear it. I will do a full screen.
There were so many nights where, after a call-in or just after any shooting or homicide, I had to get down on my knees and pray and say, God, what am I doing here? Please lead us in the right direction because we deserve better. Our kids, Black and brown children in Oakland, should not have to walk past shrines or vigils of homicides on a regular basis.
Some people think of Oakland in a bad way, but I think of Oakland with all of its wonderful and unique qualities. Lake Merritt, as beautiful as a Diego Rivera painting, or the Mormon Temple, as majestic as the Eiffel Tower. Oakland's diversity, as collaborative as a mural. Oakland is a spontaneous burst of joy.
For us in Oakland, the ceasefire strategy was built around 3 goals: reduce shootings and homicides, reduce the recidivism rate, and build community police trust.
Super excited to welcome the wonderful Gabby Giffords to our city.
It is not too much to say that it has taken the work of the entire community coming together and having hope and faith in what's possible here.
I like that expression, don't admire the problem, right? So I think about it in our coaches meetings every day. Coaches saying like, our defense is horrible. I go, stop admiring the fact that our defense is horrible. Let's do something about it, right? We can all talk about the numbers, about gun violence, but until we actually do something, nothing's going to change, right? And so it is so incredible to see this collaboration of people from every walk of life gathering to. their heads together.
And I know we talk about a lot of this work, but we also got to realize that a lot of our people, we need healing. We need mental health. We need all that.
For me and Steph go through, having a performance, that's nothing compared to what y'all had to go through to get here. And just be sitting at the table with you guys and hear your testimonials, amazing. It inspires me, and I know it inspires Steph to keep going.
I think a lot of times people assume like, oh, you've had 75 homicides, congratulations, we're done. And when I think about those 75 bodies, I can't claim victory. There is no victory in not being able to hold your brother again, to sit down across from your friend again. There is no victory in that.
All right. Thank you all for listening to that. That was just, again, it was just something I want to make sure that I played that for Madison, because, and again, there's other slides and things of that nature that
this holiday, get iPhone 12 and 5G America's been waiting for.
This new iPhone Plus Verizon 5G is incredible.
Switch now and get iPhone 12 Pro Max on us. Unlimited plans start at just $35. This is 5G from America's most reliable network.
You're sponsored now?
Yeah, right.
Newest star on TikTok. Barack and Michelle Obama's youngest daughter started making waves.
Not sure where the volume is for that.
Yeah,
probably your web browser. Go to your web browser and close that out.
First daughter is seen lip singing to Moneybag Yo's "Said Some" remix featuring the City Girls.
Well, Georgiana, or are you able to maybe help Anthony or mute that, and we can talk about something else while? Oh, there was she. All right, so maybe he's able to do that, or maybe Georgiana can help in doing that. Colleen, you answered a question on chat, and I was going to present it in case people aren't following along there. Can you talk some about the question about in Arizona, in Tucson, Arizona, approach the medical model for handling health problems as a cheaper alternative to jail?
Yes. So Dane County, we've got a relationship with Pima County. I have a colleague there. We actually, I sent a group there 4 years ago. Pima County has come here, and the big question when they came here from then Director of Human Services was, are you an expansion state? The answer is yes. And then kind of everything that was said is discounted. The difference, I think, now is there are some counties around the country that are non-expansion states, as Wisconsin is, who are moving in this area using that rich data analysis as the structure. And those are the folks that we're really looking at, and we are in conversation with DHS at the state level. So that'll be all through this planning process, which the request for proposals will likely go out this spring, that a national expert will help us define.
Yeah. All right. I was going to just ask you to define expansion, but someone answered Medicare expansion is what you're referring to.
Yes. Sorry.
No, that's all right. And now Anthony's back without the without the ad. Sorry about that. I just thought in case it took a while that we would let you get rid of that. So
no, I really appreciate that. Sorry about, I promise you, I really do not have sponsors, but we wouldn't mind for this extra support. We definitely would love to be able to have that support. But so just going forward, and I'll try to just share the screen again here. Let's see if that would work. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I don't know why. Well, okay. So I'll just kind of, and I'll end it here as far as one of the things that, as far as with our organization, is we're talking about as far as the gun violence and being able to work with so many additional partners in the community, is that we actually have an opportunity here to do something before things get too out of control. You know, as far as being able to have an 80% reduction or more in gun violence is actually achievable. And what it requires is mainly collaboration and focus at all levels. It's something that's said, I would like to say, I hear it quite often, as far as like how we give respect to the homeless person, to also to the CEO of a company. That's how we're going to get there. We have to be able to bring everyone in to be able to challenge our own thoughts, and you know, and then also create new ones as well. So, you know, and I often feel as though thinking outside the box for change, that has to be key in everything that we do. So just like every single last one of you, we need you, right? We need you at the table. We need to be able to, even though if you may not all the way understand what is going on, but you still may be able to add a perspective that needs to be either said or said at the table. So, or even at times you may even hear a perspective that may even challenge your own thoughts to be able to get you to think outside the box as well. Again, I want to say thank you everyone for just having me here, and then also sorry for the technical sponsor.
Oh, no.
Difficulty just a little bit. All right, thank you all.
Sure. And if you have a question for Anthony, you can put it into the chat box, and I can present it to him. And we will we'll try to wrap things up by about 8:15 or so. So if you have questions about the other initiatives that we heard, we can take those as well. Anthony, because we had a little bit of interruption there and distraction, what is it that focused interruption is doing that that will reduce gun violence? What specifically do you do?
So, I mean, as far as from just doing intervention as well as prevention, but actually being able to be frontline workers. So we are, I guess, in a sense, how you would consider us, as far as individuals who have the lived experience, and being able to not only meet people where they're at, and to be able to help them navigate different situations. So we do not work for MPD. So our experiences and things of that nature we bring to the table, and also because one of the, I guess, is also a blessing and a curse from the work that what I do with Nehemiah. I work with all the state and federal prisons. So I'm able to actually have a different connection, and also being an individual at one point in my life, I was actually in prison. So, and being able to show people, hey, you can change, you can do something different, but you have to want it. You have to want it, and also there's people out here like myself and others who are willing to be able to help you get to the point that where you want for your life. And some folks don't have a clue, whether if they've been involved in the system all their lives, or just, you know, just have never really allowed themselves to be able to think outside the box, and it takes work. You know, and so we bring a different dynamic, not only on the scene of an investigation or of a shooting, but then also even if we're at the hospital. But again, it goes right back to, we cannot do this by ourselves. That was something that in the beginning of our organization, and for a lot of other people as well, is that was one of the key things that I've always pushed, to say, look, yep, it's great that we have our lived experiences, we have the different ways of being able to connect with people, but then also we have to be able to make sure that they can also receive some additional assistance that we may not be able to provide, and being able to make sure that they have those connections as well. And so, and that's something that we do here in the Madison area.
Karen wants to know how your organization is funded.
Currently, we do get some funds from the city. We definitely get some donations and things of that nature as well. We have a small grant currently because we also work with youth. Also, so we have a small grant with Dane County. So we put it together as much as possible to be able to get things done.
Yeah.
And again,
heartbreaking year, wasn't it, Anthony? I mean, maybe it was just me, but it almost sounded like you choked up a little bit when talking about the increase in gun violence and especially the death of that 11-year-old girl who got caught in some crossfire.
Yes, ma'am. It's heartbreaking for all of us, right? From a child or just the fact of just losing a life, especially when it comes to gun violence, senseless gun violence. It hits hard. It's a thing of, because we show up at the hospitals, we show up on the scenes, we show up in different situations when we're able to. Currently, we have a small team coming into next year. I'm trying to be able to gather different donations so I can hire additional folks to be able to help us in the community. That it's needed. But yes, it definitely gets very hard because we see it from being in the community, being at the hospital. So when we're at the hospital, we're there with the grieving mother, the grieving father or sister or brother. When we're on the scene, we're there with the grieving mother, father, sister, and friends. So yes, it does get pretty tough.
Yeah, but you are hopeful. You are hopeful that there will be. That was a big 80% reduction in gun violence.
And it's possible. But again, and that's, you'll probably, I say this probably everywhere where I go, I probably say 100 million times, we have to do it together, right? It's like, maybe I should probably wear like a sticker or something on my forehead, but but we have to do it together. We have to be able to respect each other, even though when we don't see things the exact same way, because it's not just an instant quick fix. It's going to take time. It took time before we got here. It's going to take time to get out of the mess that we're in. And again, and I cannot say it enough. Yes, things are happening here in Madison, but also things are happening all throughout the United States. All throughout the United States, we're seeing these spikes at high numbers, but also because of working together and really bringing resources together and challenging the different things that have already happened in the community, that changes things. One person at a time, 5 people at a time, and also it changes things generationally as well. As long as we keep things going, we have to.
Let me ask a question that came in for Colleen and clarify that I had said, based on an attendee, Medicare expansion when we meant Medicaid expansion. And we have a question for Colleen that Wisconsin Medicaid does cover people under 100% of poverty. So it would seem that many services at a triage center could be funded by Medicaid or by MA.
So when we talk about $300,000, please don't think that Dane County CJC or any stakeholders think 300,000 is going to build a strong alternative to jail or the ER. The 300,000 is to do just that, looking at the different funding structures. We're not assuming everybody that uses a triage and restoration center, especially if there's a living room component, will be folks at the 100% of poverty. If anybody, I'll speak for myself, has tried to see a therapist in this city, it's very challenging in this city and county to get on a wait list. That doesn't go away. And especially for people of color, where there's a real lack of therapists of color, that doesn't go away. So the Triage and Restoration Center, the 300,000 is to plan that, the request for proposal is to plan that process out. The hope is that this isn't duplicating of anything, that this fills a gap that we need in Dane County, and that we're really aggressive on our timeline, that we hope that this would be looked at as a potential build out in 2023 or 24. Similarly with the Community Justice Center, which kind of ironically, given Anthony's conversation about gun violence, the Red Hook Community Justice Center really started after the local principal was gunned down in the streets looking for one of his pupils in what then was the heaviest gunplay area in the country, and truly transformed the criminal justice system, and transformed in that sense the community health. So those two big things are the planning will occur over the next year in 21 with hopes for 23 and 24 build up.
And someone wants to know, is it true that the 2021 Dane County budget did not include new funding for a triage center? So what's the effect of this?
So I don't want to get too much in the weeds on budget. The 300,000 is for planning, right? To build a triage center, you'll need operating expense and you'll need capital expense. The vision is during this planning process, we'll have a national expert talking to community members, talking to local professionals, looking for the gaps in our services, looking at funding, and then planning out how much it costs. So the timeline is always, we hope to be able to get something in the next budget year. We do an annual budget year. The effect, frankly, we're not ready to build or buy a building right now. We have work we have to do from my perspective.
Janice has a question for Anthony. Is your organization involved in working with juveniles and working to reduce the number of car thefts in Madison? And you answered on chat, Anthony, that you are, but how are you doing that?
So we are by basically working with Dane County, working with MPD, is also working with families that are out here in the community. There are the Neighborhood Intervention Program, which is a Dane County ran program. We connect with them as well. So when there are young folks who we can connect with, we connect with them as a partnership with the neighborhood program, with the Neighborhood Intervention Program and others. And then if there are some youth who do not have any type of cross-section with a neighborhood intervention program. Again, some of these youth, they do have a connection with the schools. And so we also, I'm also a part of the CSET team as well, where we make that additional connection. And so again, this, like I said, I may say it a million times, but we can only get things done the right way as we're working together. And that's what we do, and through all those partnerships. But of course, there's some higher level stuff that what MPD would know that we wouldn't necessarily know, but then also with that cross section of being able to connect with them as we're connecting with the youth. It's so many different pieces and people that, because what we want, one, we want our youth to survive. Two is the fact that we believe in them, and I think, I shouldn't say I think, I know we do our best, not only our agency, but all the other agencies involved, to encourage them to do something different. And that's something that we're making sure that we're doing that, no matter if they have to go to a juvenile detention, or if they're out here just hanging out in the streets and we happen to see them. The mantra is to be able to see, do you want to do something different? And if you do, there's an opportunity for you to do so. Yeah. And you have people who will help you.
Keith, one last question for you. A former Madison Police Chief, David Cooper, was in a Wisconsin Watch piece on police reforms needed, and he was saying that that police really have to stop it with the riot gear and the militarization and using tear gas to break up peaceful protesters, and he had a lot of things to say actually. But I'm wondering if the Civilian Oversight Board will have anything to do with tactics.
It very well could. To start with, I think the Civilian Oversight Board and the Independent Monitor will be using that 2019 Ad Hoc Committee's report with its 177 recommendations sort of as the playbook for moving forward, at least initially. And included among those recommendations were certainly recommendations designed to reduce the use of force and it did address some tactical considerations. And I think there's no reason why this Civilian Oversight Board would not weigh into some of those kinds of issues. David Cooper certainly has been a leading light on those things, and I think what he said is probably the kinds of things that the Civilian Oversight Board will be very interested in. It reminds me of an op-ed I saw in the New York Times within the last couple of months by the police chief, I believe from Burlington, Vermont, and sort of his the thrust of his argument was, as a police officer, he said, police need to reimagine their relationship with their guns. And it was really a powerful piece that I think speaks to what you're saying. And I think it's the kind of thing our Civilian Oversight Board might really weigh in on, which is to say that we need to make sure that police, instead of approaching belligerent people in the streets by yelling or pulling weapons or acting in a demanding compliance, that they approach them in a softer, understanding way and don't think of the gun as the first option, but as the last option. And a reflection of this is sort of when you look at a typical training regimen in a police academy, police officers spend a lot of time in the firing range. It's one of the first things they, in many departments, I'm not sure how it is in Madison, but one of the first things they look at, and it's almost like the gun is an attachment to the officer. And this police chief was arguing, and I think our Civilian Board might be interested in saying, wait a minute, does it really have to be that way? Are there ways we can engage with our community that don't depend on such brute shows of force?
There are some who are concerned, well, my alder for one, who says that police are feeling really demoralized right now, that they feel as though no one supports them, or many feel as though no one supports them, and that this Civilian Oversight Board is just yet another example of that. How do you respond to that?
You know, I'm sensitive to that concern. I'm not a police hater. I'm not a police basher. I think there's room for reform, but I think it's actually in the interest of everyone, police and community members alike. So I reiterate what I said earlier. I come to this task not as a way of blaming police for everything that's going wrong, but rather as an opportunity to build trust, to build engagement, to find a path forward that meets the shared objectives that we all have. Are there some in the community who are very, very critical, want to dismantle the police? You bet, but this is a democracy. Those voices need to be heard. And in fact, some people complained that our Civilian Oversight Board they were unhappy that it has representatives on it from some of the most vocal critics of policing in the city, and they said they want to dismantle the police. They shouldn't be part of the board. And my response was, no, those are exactly the people you want at the table. we need to find a way that we can all work together. And if we're just further pushing those voices to the side, all that does is add to the sense, to the lack of trust in the community. So I recognize that it must be very demoralizing at times to do this very, very difficult work, but I hope we can all recognize that coming to the table together, bringing together voices of agreement and voices of strong disagreement is the only way that we can build relationships, repair damaged trust in the community, and move forward.
And I'm going over time, but because I have another question that I think there'd be a lot of interest in, let me ask for forgiveness rather than permission. There is a pilot program in Southwest Madison, one of our attendees writes, that trains neighbors to intervene with people who are having conflicts before it gets to the point where police would be called. And she'd like to know if Anthony, you or anyone is aware of a program like this.
So, sorry. First, I want to say thank you for mentioning that program. Actually, that's one of our programs as well. That's our CSW workers who are working in the Raymond Road community, the Meadowwood community. So yeah, that's a different level of being able to provide support. So again, being able to attach our organization not only just to some of the real low things that may happen, so we won't have to, whether it's crime or whether it's things that we may be able to intervene to make sure that law enforcement does not have to be a part of it. That's not removing law enforcement if they need to be called or whatever. None of those community safety workers, none of them are. They're not officers. They don't carry guns. It is about relationships, like what they have in a community, and in that community in particularly. And it's the same way. And so eventually, the way how our hope is to be able to have community safety workers on each side of town at some point. The Southwest side, it's funny, I grew up in Madison, so when you call that area the Southwest side, I'm like, oh wow, this is such a big difference, because back in the days it was only called the West Side to us. So, yeah, so, but all right, but and so that is another one of our initiatives for our community. We want to be able to add on to help with community safety and public safety.
Well, I think that we probably should end it there. Thank you all for being with us. It's been very informative, and I think has given us a lot of food for thought and a lot of meetings to go to in the future too. There's lots going on. Anthony Cooper Sr. is the CEO of Focus Interruption. Colleen Clark Bernhardt is the coordinator of the Dane County Criminal Justice Council, and Keith Finley, professor of law at the University of Wisconsin, and an alternate member of Madison's new Civilian Oversight Board, and was also involved in the planning of that. So thanks to everyone for attending, and thanks to Mary Englam and Georgiana Hernandez who put this forum together. And thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you, Joy.
Good night.
Hi.
Good night.